Somewhere in your family, there's a name nobody ever explained properly. Not a nickname, not a place your grandfather made up after a few glasses of port. A surname. And if that surname happens to match one of the 10 we're covering today, a Portuguese noble once knelt in front of a king, or defied one, or died for one, and passed that name down through 6 centuries until it landed in your mailbox. Portugal is a small country with a long memory. It produced sailors who mapped half the planet, a constable who won a kingdom's independence on a single afternoon, and a royal house that started as an illegitimate son nobody wanted to acknowledge. These surnames survived plague, empire, earthquake, and exile. Some of them are still worn by presidents and football players today. Some of them ended up in Brazil, in Goa, in Massachusetts, without anyone quite remembering why. Stick around until number 1, because that name belongs to the house that eventually gave England one of its queens, and gave Portugal its final royal dynasty. Before we get into the list, hit subscribe now, because these bloodline breakdowns take real research, and I'd rather you not miss the one we're planning on Spanish conquistador surnames next. Alright, let's get into it. Number 10. The surname Moniz. This name comes from a first name plus is pattern common in early medieval Portugal, meaning roughly son of Monio, and it belonged to a nobleman named Aigás Moniz. Aigás wasn't a king. He was something more interesting, the tutor, and later the most trusted vassal, of a young nobleman named Afonso Henriques, the man who would become the first king of Portugal and founder of the House of Burgundy, Portugal's original royal dynasty. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for Aigás. In 1127, the King of Leon and Castile, Alfonso VII, marched an army into Portuguese territory to remind young Afonso Henriques, who was technically still in charge. Aigás Moniz, acting as guarantor, personally swore an oath that Afonso Henriques would submit and pay homage. Afonso Henriques had other plans. He had zero interest in submitting to anyone, and he broke the oath his tutor had sworn on his behalf. So Aigás Moniz did something almost nobody in medieval Europe actually did. He took his wife and his children, put ropes around their necks, dressed them in funeral clothes, and walked barefoot into the court of the King of Leon and Castile to offer their lives in exchange for the broken promise. The chronicles say the Castilian king was so moved by the gesture that he pardoned the entire family on the spot. Aigás Moniz never became a duke or a count. What he became was a legend of loyalty that Portuguese schoolchildren still learn about today, and his descendants carried the Moniz name through the Azores and into mainland noble houses for generations. If your name is Moniz, your bloodline may carry the man who was willing to hang his own children for a king's honor before the Kingdom of Portugal even had a flag. Number 9. The surname Pereira. Pereira comes from the Portuguese word for pear tree, likely referring to an ancestral property, and it belonged to a man most Portuguese historians consider the single most important military figure the country ever produced, Nuno Álvares Pereira. By 1383, the House of Burgundy had run out of male heirs, and Portugal was staring down the barrel of a Castilian invasion that would have swallowed the country whole. An illegitimate son of a previous king, João, master of Aviz, needed a general. He found one in Nuno Álvares Pereira, a nobleman barely in his mid-20s who had never lost a battle he commanded. On the 14th of August, 1385, at a place called Aljubarrota, Nuno Álvares Pereira arranged a heavily outnumbered Portuguese force on a hillside, dug pit traps into the ground in front of his lines, and waited for the Castilian cavalry to charge straight into them. It worked. The Castilian army was shattered in under an hour. João of Aviz became King João I, and Portuguese independence was secured for the next 2 centuries. Nuno Álvares Pereira was made Constable of Portugal, the highest military office in the kingdom, and later in life he gave away nearly his entire fortune and joined a Carmelite monastery as a lay brother, dying in the habit he'd chosen instead of the armor he was famous for. He was canonized a saint by the Catholic Church in 2009. The Pereira surname spread from his descendants and his soldiers into Brazil, into Cape Verde, and into some of the largest Portuguese surname populations in the world today. If your name is Pereira, your bloodline may carry the general who outthought an entire kingdom on one August afternoon and then walked away from all the glory it bought him. Number 8. The surname Castro. This name comes from the Latin word for a fortified settlement, and in Portugal it belonged to one of the most tragic figures in the country's royal history, Inês de Castro. Inês wasn't born a queen. She was a Galician noblewoman who came to the Portuguese court as a lady-in-waiting, and she caught the eye of Crown Prince Pedro, heir to the throne. Pedro fell hopelessly in love with her, which was a political disaster, because his father, King Afonso IV, worried that her powerful Castilian relatives would drag Portugal into someone else's war. In 1355, the king sent 3 of his own courtiers to murder Inés while Pedro was away. They didn't hide what they'd done. They beheaded her in front of her own children. When Pedro became king 2 years later, he hunted down 2 of the killers, and according to the chronicles, personally supervised their execution by having their hearts torn out, one from the front and one from the back, in retaliation for what they'd done to his own heart. Then, in a scene so strange it still shows up in operas and paintings today, Pedro allegedly had Inés's remains exhumed, dressed in royal robes, and crowned as queen, forcing the nobility of the court to kiss the hand of her corpse. Historians argue about how much of that coronation story is legend versus fact, but nobody argues about the murder, and nobody argues about what it did to Pedro. The Castro surname, carried by her descendants and her extended family, spread through Portugal, Spain, and later Latin America, where it remains one of the most common surnames on the entire continent. If your name is Castro, your bloodline may connect to the noblewoman whose death turned a Portuguese prince into a king obsessed with vengeance. Alright, quick pause here. If you've made it this far and your family name has already shown up once, drop it in the comments right now before we get to the next batch. Because the names from 7 down to 1 carry the house that eventually put a queen on the throne of England. Smash that like button too. It actually helps this video reach more people whose surnames belong on this list. Let's keep going. Number 7. The surname Coutinho. Coutinho likely derives from an old term connected to hunting rights or forest wardenship, and it belonged to a family that served the House of Aviz across generations of overseas expansion. The most prominent of them was Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho, a nobleman and military commander who fought in North Africa under the Aviz kings during the campaigns to hold Portuguese fortresses along the Moroccan coast in the 15th century. The Coutinho family didn't just fight, they administered. Multiple Coutinhos served as governors of Portuguese strongholds in Africa and India, positions that came with enormous risk, since these were often the first men targeted when local forces tried to retake captured territory. One branch of the family, the Coutinhos who held the title Marquis of Marialva, remained close to the Portuguese crown for centuries, right through the dynastic upheavals that followed. Their coat of arms, 5 silver crescents on a red field, is one of the more recognizable in Portuguese heraldry, and it shows up on churches and manor houses across the country to this day. If your name is Coutinho, your bloodline may carry a family that spent 3 centuries running the empire's most dangerous outposts on behalf of kings who rarely left the palace. Number 6. The surname Meneses. Meneses is a name with roots stretching back to the Kingdom of Leon before Portugal even existed as an independent country, and it belonged to one of the most militarily active noble families of the House of Aviz era. Duarte de Meneses is the name that matters most here. In 1415, Portugal captured the North African city of Ceuta in a surprise assault, and Duarte de Meneses was appointed governor of the city not long after, a job that basically meant holding a hostile fortress surrounded by enemies with almost no reinforcements. He held it for years. When he was finally captured in battle near Ceuta in 1464, the Marinid forces holding him demanded an enormous ransom. King Afonso V of Portugal, strapped for cash after years of African campaigns, took years to raise it. Duarte de Meneses died in captivity before the ransom ever arrived, an old man who had given the crown decades of service and gotten a slow death in a foreign cell in return. The Meneses family kept producing governors, admirals, and viceroys for another 2 centuries, serving Portuguese India and Portuguese Africa in roles that historians still study today. If your name is Meneses, your bloodline may carry a governor who held an empire's frontier fortress for the House of Aviz until the crown itself couldn't save him in time. Number 5. The surname Noronha. This name has one of the strangest origin stories on this entire list, because it starts with royal illegitimacy. The House of Aviz produced its share of children born outside marriage, and one of them, Afonso, an illegitimate son of King João I's own illegitimate uncle, Dom Pedro de Meneses, took the surname Noronha through his mother's line, a name connected to the medieval kingdom of Leon. The Noronha family became so tightly woven into the Portuguese aristocracy that they eventually held the title of Marquis of Angeja and produced viceroys of India. But the name most people actually recognize connects to a different branch entirely. Fernão de Noronha, a wealthy merchant of likely converted Jewish background who financed early Portuguese expeditions to Brazil in exchange for trading rights. In 1503, an island roughly 200 miles off the Brazilian coast was named after him, and it's still called Fernando de Noronha today, now a protected paradise that draws divers and biologists from around the world. Between the aristocratic Noronhas holding viceroyalties and the merchant Noronha with an entire archipelago named for him, this is a surname that touched Portuguese power from two completely different directions. If your name is Noronha, your bloodline may connect to either a royal adjacent noble house or the merchant whose name is still printed on Brazilian passports and tourist maps 600 years later. Number 4. The surname Vasconcelos. Vasconcelos traces back to the medieval Basque and northern Iberian region, and the family attached themselves to the Portuguese court early, rising through generations of service to both the House of Aviz and later the House of Braganza. One of the more colorful figures to carry the name was Luís Mendes de Vasconcelos, a soldier, writer, and strategist active in the late 16th century, who wrote extensively about naval warfare and Portuguese overseas strategy at a moment when the empire desperately needed both. The Vasconcelos family didn't produce a single dominant war hero the way some names on this list did. What they produced instead was continuity. Generation after generation of administrators, magistrates, and court officials who kept the machinery of the Portuguese state running through the union with Spain from 1580 to 1640, and then through the difficult restoration years that followed under the new House of Braganza. Their name traveled to Brazil in enormous numbers during the colonial period, and today, Vasconcelos remains one of the most recognized surnames in Brazilian public life, carried by writers, politicians, and musicians. If your name is Vasconcelos, your bloodline likely carries not one dramatic battlefield moment, but centuries of the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping a kingdom functioning while its royal houses changed around them. Number 3. The surname Albuquerque. This name comes from a town on the Spanish-Portuguese border, and it belonged to a man the Portuguese still refer to as the Terrible, and also, somewhat contradictorily, as the Great, Afonso de Albuquerque. Serving the House of Aviz at the peak of Portugal's overseas expansion, Albuquerque was appointed the second governor of Portuguese India in 1509, and what he did with that position changed the shape of global trade for the next century. He captured Goa in 1510, turning it into the administrative capital of Portuguese Asia. He seized Malacca in 1511, a choke point city that controlled trade between India and China. He tried, and mostly succeeded, in building a Portuguese monopoly over the spice trade that funneled staggering wealth back to Lisbon. He was also, by most accounts, a brutal administrator who showed little mercy to conquered populations, and he died in 1515, believing, wrongly, that the Portuguese king had turned against him and stripped him of his command. He hadn't. The letter confirming his continued authority arrived just after he died at sea near Goa. Centuries later, his name became so associated with the height of Portuguese naval power that it was given to warships, and later to a city, Albuquerque, New Mexico, founded by Spanish colonists honoring a different but related noble line. If your name is Albuquerque, your bloodline may carry the governor whose conquests briefly made Portugal the wealthiest trading empire on the planet. We are 2 away from the top, and if you've enjoyed tracing your family through the storms and courts of medieval Portugal, do me a favor and subscribe now, because next week we're covering the surnames tied to the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition records, and those are names people spend years trying to trace. You will not want to miss it. Number 2. The surname Gama. Gama likely derives from an old term meaning leg, or possibly from a place name, and it belonged to the most famous navigator Portugal ever produced, a man serving the House of Aviz at the exact moment the dynasty decided to bet its entire future on the ocean, Vasco da Gama. In July of 1497, Vasco da Gama left Lisbon with 4 ships and a mission that had already killed sailors on previous attempts, to find a sea route to India around the southern tip of Africa. Nobody in Europe had ever done it. 10 months later, in May of 1498, his fleet reached Calicut on the Indian coast, and Portugal suddenly had direct access to the spice trade that had previously required paying enormous middleman fees to Arab and Venetian traders. The voyage was brutal. Roughly 2/3 of his original crew died from scurvy, violence, or disease before the fleet limped home. But King Manuel I understood exactly what he was holding, and Vasco da Gama was rewarded with the title Admiral of the Indian Seas and later Count of Vidigueira, dragging his family from minor nobility into the highest ranks of the Portuguese aristocracy in a single generation. He returned to India one final time in 1524 as viceroy, and died there just months into the posting, likely from an illness picked up during decades of ocean travel that had already worn his body down. The Gama name spread through Portugal and its former colonies, and today it's carried by millions across Brazil, Goa, and Portuguese-speaking Africa. If your name is Gama, your bloodline may carry the navigator who personally opened the sea route that turned a small kingdom on the edge of Europe into a global trading empire. And now, number 1. The surname Braganza. There is no royal surname in Portuguese history with a stranger origin story than this one, and no name that ended up connected to more thrones across more countries. The House of Braganza began, almost accidentally, with an illegitimate son. King João I of Portugal, the same king Nuno Álvares Pereira helped put on the throne at Aljubarrota, had a son outside of marriage named Afonso, born around 1377, before João's official marriage to Philippa of Lancaster. Rather than leave the boy without status, João granted him vast lands in northeastern Portugal and, in 1442, the title Duke of Braganza, making him the head of an entirely new noble house. For nearly 200 years, the House of Braganza was extraordinarily wealthy but politically sidelined, the largest private landowners in the entire kingdom, while the crown itself passed through other branches of the family and eventually into a 60-year union with the Spanish crown starting in 1580. The Portuguese nobility hated that arrangement more with each passing year, and in 1640, a group of conspirators pulled off a nearly bloodless coup, throwing off Spanish rule and placing the current Duke of Braganza on the Portuguese throne as King João IV. The House of Braganza then ruled Portugal for the next 270 years, all the way until the monarchy was abolished in 1910. Along the way, one Braganza princess, Catherine of Braganza, married King Charles II of England in 1662, becoming Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and reportedly introducing the English court to the habit of drinking tea. Another branch of the family became emperors of an independent Brazil in the 19th century, meaning the House of Braganza is one of the vanishingly few noble houses in history to have ruled on 2 different continents. If your name is Braganza, or the anglicized Braganza you sometimes see in immigration records, your bloodline connects to a family that started as an illegitimate royal afterthought and ended up wearing crowns in Lisbon, London, and Rio de Janeiro. If your surname showed up anywhere on this list, tell us exactly where in the comments, and tell us which name surprised you the most. And if none of these 10 matched your family, that just means we haven't gotten to your name yet. Subscribe now, because the next list goes deeper into the Portuguese nobility, into the names tied to the age of exploration that we didn't have time for today, and there's a very good chance yours is on it.